Three, two, one. All right, we are live. Professor Norman Finkelstein, it's so good to have you back. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Can you hear me properly? All good?
I hear you fine.
Perfect. So I initially asked to see you again because 3 months ago, Amnesty International released a comprehensive report, finally admitting what has been known for a very long time, that Israel was perpetrating and implementing an apartheid regime in Palestine. And it made few waves. I think in Switzerland, in our media, we had few articles, but it really didn't last very long. So we didn't have the chance to properly analyze what was in this report, if anything was new. And I thought you obviously were the best person, since your expertise on that subject is hardly matched by anyone. You have many other expertise subjects we can discuss, I'm sure, for weeks. But I wanted to start on that one. Can you maybe summarize what was in this report and why it is significant?
There were a trio of reports that were released within a year, maybe a little bit less than a year, but I think about a year. The first of the reports came out from B'Tselem, which is the main Israeli human rights organization that monitors Israeli human rights violations and crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories. And they released a position paper in which they said that there's effectively one state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, that is to say, the whole of Israel plus the West Bank and Gaza. It's effectively one state, and that state is a Jewish supremacist state anchored in apartheid. It was on the shorter side of a report. It was not a large report, and it dealt with what I would call a narrow range of issues to document the fact that effectively Israel has created a regime, including the whole of Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, that is repressive and discriminatory, and which approximates the international definition of apartheid. After that report, which was issued at the initiative of the executive director of B'Tselem, a very decent fellow, I'm told, named Haggai Elad, who is both principled and impressive in his academic credentials. He is a PhD in physics from Harvard. My oldest friend in the occupied territories, who works for B'Tselem, his name is Musa Abu Heshesh. I was speaking with him a few weeks ago, and it struck me as indicative of Haggai Elad's character that when I mentioned Haggai Elad's impressive credentials as a physicist, Musa was a very smart guy and an excellent listener, which is, in my opinion, a prerequisite for true brilliance. He's an excellent listener. He said, I never knew that, which is to say, he works together with Haggai Elad for a long time now, and Haggai Elad never mentioned his academic credentials, which tells me something about his character. If you have a PhD in physics from Harvard, that's something that most people would wear on their lapel, and that he didn't, you know. In any event, he kind of cleared the space for other human rights organizations, which now had the cover or the protective cover of B'Tselem, to go even, first of all, to declare Israel as an apartheid state, but even to go considerable distance further. And so both Human Rights Watch then came out with a report, which is probably at this point the most influential human rights organization in the world, came out with a report that stated Israel's policies in the occupied Palestinian territories are based on discrimination and domination, with an ethnic component, and therefore they approximate apartheid, and that in Israel proper, there are also significant elements of discrimination. They don't describe it as apartheid. And also, what new ground they broke was they didn't stop at the present. They went back to Israel's founding and said the two pillars of Zionist policy in the creation of Israel, the two pillars were, one, to create a Jewish majority. In order to create that Jewish majority, they had to clear out the indigenous population, or to use current language, to execute a mass ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Otherwise, they couldn't have created that Jewish majority. And additionally, in order to create a viable Jewish state, they had to engage in massive, indiscriminate appropriation of Palestinian land. That if you want to settle a large Jewish population there, and virtually all of the land is owned by the indigenous population, then the only way you can create a Jewish state where people can viably live is to carry out a massive expropriation of Palestinian land, or from the Palestinian landowners. And so what Human Rights Watch effectively said was, from the creation, from the get-go, you could not have created a Jewish state, the goal of the Zionist movement. You couldn't have created a Jewish state had you not carried out a massive ethnic cleansing and a massive appropriation of land from the indigenous population, in this case, Palestinians.
What is it? What it?
Let me just to finish.
Yeah, that's the Nakba, no?
Yeah.
Is it called
Yes,
the Nakba? Yeah.
Nakba. In other words, the Human Rights Watch report delegitimized the entire Zionist project from its inception. It said, if you wanted to create a Jewish state, which was the goal of the Zionist movement, it couldn't have been achieved in the absence of a massive ethnic cleansing, which is a criminal act under international law, and the massive expropriation of Palestinian land, which is also a criminal act under international law. So now I'll let you, unless you want me to just go to amnesty now.
No, you can. Yeah, I think
Okay,
we talked about that last time. So yeah, if you could go to amnesty report.
So now when we go to amnesty, I would say amnesty, first of all, its report was the most exhaustive. It was 290 pages. And to be honest with you, it gave me a profound headache to read it.
Yeah, you told me.
Mostly because it seemed to want to exhaustively catalog each and every discriminatory law and act by the Israeli government, which, given that we're covering about 75 years now and an awful lot of discriminatory and oppressive acts, for my taste, it was too exhaustive. But as a document, it's important, obviously, to have it all under two covers, a back cover and the front cover. And amnesty went the furthest because amnesty declared that not only was the whole of that area from the Mediterranean to the Jordan a apartheid state, which is what B'Tselem said. And not only was this apartheid state built in to the Zionist enterprise, which is what which is what Human Rights Watch said, they went one step further and said the whole of the Israel-Palestine conflict, including the refugee question, because they're the first ones who actually addressed the refugee question as not a separate question from the occupied Palestinian territories in Israel. They say the refugee question was integral to the apartheid project of Israel and integral to the apartheid reality of Israel now. In other words, to talk about Israeli apartheid has to include the refugees as one component of that apartheid system. And so it was as comprehensive an indictment as one could conceive of Israel, not least. Well, there are various aspects to it, but I want to leave it at that and then hear your questions.
Yeah. My further question to that was it anything new in that report, and how significant is it for the international community, quote unquote, because we know that international community is basically the West. Does it change anything?
Well, I cannot say that I learned anything new or profound in it, not because I knew all the laws, not because I knew all the acts. Actually, I probably didn't know more than 5%, to be perfectly honest. No, I did not. I mean, I know the broad picture, but when you start going through every single law Israel's passed in the last 75 years to discriminate against Palestinians, hey, I couldn't even tell you 2 laws that were passed by my local city council on any subject. I just don't know, you know? But the broad picture, I can't say it filled in any new gaps in my understanding of the overall process. So as I wrote to one colleague and friend and comrade, Jamie Stern Weiner, he had sent me a document which alleged numerous, even numberless, errors in the amnesty document. I said to him, it really hardly makes a difference because you have a 288-page document. Yes, a lot of errors are going to creep in. That's inevitable.
What kind of errors would you?
I can't even go. It's micro details.
Okay,
You know,
it doesn't change the subject or the substance.
It doesn't change the general thrust.
Okay, then it's not important.
No, of course, it was true that A, there was an ethnic cleansing, B, there was a massive expropriation of land, and C, that Israel has built a discriminatory and repressive system in which Palestinians are consigned to second-class or no-class citizenship. From a second-class or no-class personhood in Israeli society. That's just not much of a revelation. I was reading today an Arab member of the Meretz Party, which is a centrist liberal party in Israel. She quit yesterday, throwing the government for the 1,000th time this past week into crisis, because the Israeli government is always in crisis. Because she said, after the Israeli assault on Al-Aqsa Mosque and the killing of the Palestinian journalists, I can no longer be part of the government. I'm thinking to myself, you really needed those two events for you to the revelation to suddenly dawn on you that this is a repressive, discriminatory government. You really needed those two events. How about looking at the last 75 years, So it doesn't, errors, if they creep in, don't change the general thrust. Anybody who knows the history, of course, it's true what Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and before them all, that Selim have to say. However, there is a very significant political aspect of the report, which is that Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, they represent broad liberal opinion. You might say they represent the moral ambiance of liberal opinion. They have a kind of moral authority. No liberal wants to be placed in the position of dismissing Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International. That's an uncomfortable position for a liberal to be in. And so that means, in my opinion, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, they are fixtures of liberal opinion. They also depend upon liberal money, donations. And there's no possibility, in my opinion, that they would have issued those reports unless they felt confident that those reports would sit well with liberal opinion. That is to say, their donor base, their constituency, they calculated that even as they described Israel as an apartheid state in whole or in part, they calculated that their liberal constituency would not break ranks with them. That's a very important point. It means, well, I should add, a large portion of that liberal constituency and donor base is Jewish. And so they, in my opinion, have to be acting on the assumption that they can carry their liberal, in no small part, Jewish base, Jewish liberal constituency even as they crossed that red line and declared Israel to be, in part or in whole, from its inception, from the birth of Israel, an apartheid and fundamentally a criminal state. So that's very significant. My memory goes back far enough that I would say that was totally unthinkable as in the 50 years ago, no, 40 years, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Well, Human Rights Watch wasn't around, but Amnesty International was around from the 1970s. And it was unthinkable. So that was a huge, call it victory, not for the Palestinians in particular, but for truth in general. That was a very significant victory. Whether anything will come of it, no. No, because the Palestinians have no leadership. They have no organization. And so, like all the victories the Palestinians have won in the court of public opinion, be it the 2004 International Court of Justice advisory opinion, which came out squarely in the support of Palestinian rights under international law, be it the 2009 Goldstone Report, which was a landmark document accusing Israel of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, possible crimes against humanity, during its assault on Gaza, be it all the human rights reports that we mentioned already, B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, Amazon. The Palestinian leadership just collects these victories and puts them in its drawer to collect dust. So they're just paper victories. There's no concept of translating these important victories, albeit paper victories, into a political force, which is, of course, what the Zionist movement did. The Zionist movement takes paper victories like the Balfour Declaration, which no one would have ever heard of, were it not for the fact that the Zionist movement exploited the Balfour Declaration in its political struggle, which is what political movements are supposed to do. They took the 1947 partition resolution, exploited it in their political struggle, which is what political movements are supposed to do. What does it mean, exploited it? It means each of these paper victories, as Abba Eban, the eminent foreign minister of Israel, put it, each of these paper victories, he said, is a certificate of legitimacy. That is to say, you broadcast it to the broad public in order to garner public support for your enterprise. You say, look what the Balfour Declaration says. Look what the partition resolution says. Each of those are certificates of legitimacy in the battle for public opinion. The Palestinians, they have this idiotic, well, they have no leadership. It's, Israel's surrogates. But leaving that aside, they have this idiotic idea that if you win these certificates of legitimacy, these paper victories, then they amount to winning the struggle. No, they're just paper. There's nobody who's going to enforce it. Yeah. It's not like the International Court of Justice. They're going to enforce the decision. They can only pronounce on it. They don't have an enforcement mechanism. And the same thing is true of the Human Rights Watch reports. These are weapons in the arsenal of trying to win public opinion. But the Palestinians, they don't have it. They just have these surrogates for Israel, whose main concern actually concerns you as a Swiss.
Yeah.
Namely, the main concern is to fill up their Swiss secret bank accounts, which is with as much money as they can get. That's their only goal.
There are not much too secret bank account in Switzerland. USA forced us to kind of renounce our secrecy kind of a thing. So it's and I think it's for the good thing. But now only them can be so secret. But that's another story.
I think my friend Musa was reminding me, I had forgotten, one of the senior members of the Palestinian Authority, Jibril Rajoub, or Rajoub Jibril, I can't remember. He has it was reported he had about $450 million in Swiss bank accounts. That's who they are. They're the lowest of the low life, all of them.
So you're saying that there's no short-term result or gain for the Palestinian side, but do you think then maybe they are on the long terms? Yeah, when you see the youth, for instance, the youth, American youth, the Jewish American youth is less and less prone to support Israeli governments or in crimes.
Yeah, because American Jews remain overwhelmingly liberal. And in the context of the United States, what does liberal mean? Liberal means supporting human rights. Liberal means being anti-war, though that's changed now with the catastrophe in the Ukraine. Liberal means supporting human rights. Liberal means being anti-war. And most critically now, what does liberal mean? Liberal means being anti-racism. That's what liberal means in the United States right now with the identity politics. So how can you, as a liberal, which most young Jews are, probably among young Jews, it's probably about 80-20 between liberal and conservative, it's about 80-20. How can they support an apartheid state? That's just not possible. So, of course, they're going to be highly critical of the state of Israel. And frankly, it's an embarrassment. It's a subject that Jews, young Jews in particular, if they're not going to outright denounce it, they are going to try to avoid the subject.
But without the U.S. Support, at what point do you think Israel can continue as it is in an international stage?
Well, there are two phenomena occurring simultaneously. Public opinion is turning against Israel, but elite opinion is actually becoming more pro-Israel.
That's true.
Because you see in places like Germany, where the German government is carrying on in the most vicious authoritarian way to repress any public expression of support for the Palestinians. You see that in the UK as well.
Yeah.
UK, as my young friend Jamie Stern-Weiner sends me each day a new email about a new outrage of trying to stamp out any public support for the Palestinians. And you see it very widely now in the US on college campuses and elsewhere, where the Israel lobby, mostly the Jewish lobby, though obviously large numbers of Jews no longer subscribe to the tenets of the Jewish lobby, but with the Jewish lobby attempting to quash, suppress, repress any public criticism of Israel, A, on college campuses and B, in the social media. So you have two contradictory tendencies. Public opinion is turning against Israel. Governmental action is attempting to suppress the growing criticism of Israel.
And any dissonant voices like Jeremy Corbyn or in France Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who dare to be critique of the Israeli crime, sorry for my accent, are immediately smeared by any means with such a violence from mainly their own side ideologically. Like like Labour, the Labour
it's slightly misleading there.
Okay. Correct me, please.
No, I'm you got the general picture right, but I think there are important subtleties there, which is, yes, the prime mover in the attacks on Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, they were the Jewish lobby. However, the other members of the Labour Party who were averse, anti-Corbyn to begin with, because they didn't feel any identification with his radical reformist political viewpoint, they exploited the anti-Semitism smear in order to oust Corbyn from power.
So there is a combination of two different interests that use this.
Absolutely. There was, well, the Jews in the UK are rich, so there was for wealthy Jews, there was both the class element and the loyalty to Israel. It was both. But the overwhelming assault on Corbyn, this massive, hysterical, fantastic, gargantuan lie that was disseminated against Corbyn, that was the whole British ruling elite and its organs, its propaganda organs, from
the media,
the Daily Mail to the Guardian, the despicable Guardian under Kath Viner, who's one of the most repellent cowards and hypocrites on God's earth. From the Daily Mail, the tabloids, to the Guardian, from the BBC to Sky News, that wasn't really about, they have such a deep feeling for the Jewish people and fear of anti-Semitism. It was the ruling elite closing ranks to stop the Corbyn candidacy. Same thing in the US, where the ruling elites joined to stop the Bernie Sanders candidacy. However, in our case, the issue of Bernie Sanders' relative support for the Palestinians never really came up. Maybe this was too early. He didn't win the primary, so he wasn't the actual candidate. And maybe it would have come up in the general election.
But Cornel West was an associate of Bernie Sanders, Cornel West, so probably that makes some people kind of nervous.
It wasn't just Cornel West, it was the whole thrust. Listen, Bernie Sanders was going on television in every primary debate and saying, Big Pharma are a gang of crooks, they're cheating us all. He was attacking every night the banks by name, the investment houses like Goldman Sachs by name. He was saying they're all a band of crooks and thieves by name, on television, every debate, every rally. So of course they're going to try to stop them. Of course they're going to try to stop them. And they work together. A major figure in trying to stop them was the utterly disgusting Barack Obama, who is pulled out every once in a while. It's like a puppet, a stick figure. He's pulled out in order to stabilize the Democratic base by using his blackness, his identity politics, in order to stifle and suppress any institutional challenge to the equivalent of the later Labour Party leadership in the UK. That's his job. And Obama, in the case of Bernie Sanders, he had a second personal motive. In part, he gets all of his power and influence because he is the instrument of the Democratic Party to repress any real insurgency within the Democratic Party, which was represented in the past 2 election cycles by Bernie Sanders' campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Also because Obama is a stupefying narcissist who wants to project the image of the prophet and the conscience of the party, and who feels personally threatened when somebody like Bernie Sanders comes along and represents something real and not just this image that Obama has cultivated of being so cool and so chill and so hip that he can't possibly be a tool of the ruling class. He is the functional equivalent of Whoopi Goldberg. You know, somebody who has the dreads and the granny glasses and looks so hip and so cool, even though Whoopi is a complete imbecile, a thimble. A thimble. You know what a thimble is when you sew and put on your finger? A thimble. Her entire gray matter, her mental component can fit inside the thimble, and there would still be a lot of room left over. So she is what Hollywood uses to show that Hollywood is hip and chill, and she's utterly talentless, but she gets every award. She gets an Oscar, she gets an Emmy, she gets a Grammy, and they keep piling the awards on her because she's useful. Same thing with Barack Obama. He's useful. And that's his job.
You said earlier the Jews in UK are rich. You're going to be... Did you say that?
Why? Because I don't know why people are so afraid to speak the most transparent facts. When I was growing up, we used the expression a wasp. A wasp, you know, is like a spider, a wasp. But in the case of our culture, WASP stood for White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And they were the wealthy elite in our country, the WASPs, we call them. And nobody had a problem with saying WASPs are rich, they control the country, they're wealthy. But suddenly when you say Jews, who are the richest ethnic group in the ethno-religious group in the United States.
How do we know that?
Because there have been 1,000 sociological studies on it. You're sitting in front of a computer, just Google what is the richest ethno-religious group in the United States? And you'll get Jews. And Jews are very proud of that. You know, Jews like to kvel. Kvel means boast. It's the Yiddish for boast, K-V-E-L-L. The Jews like to kvel how successful they are in the United States. But when suddenly a non-Jew says what every Jew says, how successful we are in the United States, how many Jews won Nobel Prizes, how many Jews are in industry, how many Jews are in publishing, how many Jews are in Hollywood. The moment you say, a non-Jew says that, you're an anti-Semite. Jews, brag about it. They boast about it. But then suddenly, if you say it and you're not Jewish, you become an anti-Semite. And if, like myself, you are Jewish, you're just repeating a statistical fact. The richest ethno-religious group in the United States are Jews. If you say that, you suddenly become an anti-Semite. Conspiracy theories, you're saying Jews control the world. No, I'm not saying Jews control the world. I'm saying Jews are the richest ethno-religious group in the United States. And the same thing in the UK, more or less. I don't know if they're the richest, probably the richest, but I can't say that for certain. Well, that's just a sociological fact. What you do with the fact, whether you get carried away with the fact and you start saying Jews control the world, okay, that may be illegitimate, but I noticed from the concentration of your eyes, you're trying to Google. So Google it. What is the richest ethno-religious group in the United States? Google it.
Well, and I will maybe show it later on online. I know there are some South African people online because are also some members of my family. And I had a question from a listener who asked regarding the last event of Shireen and the police attack on the funeral.
Murder. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, after they murder her, I mean, yeah, obviously, but in the funeral, they continue to attack basic respect. Is there any equivalence in apartheid South Africa at the time of that degree of, yeah?
Yeah, hold on for 1 second. I just have to answer the door. Give me 1/2 second.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
And during that time, I will try to find online if I find what is. I'll Google what is the wealthiest ethnicity in USA. Okay. Ethnicity it's Indians, but ethnic is different. Or is it? I'll ask. So I googled. Let me maybe share that online if I can. No, I can't. That's the right camera. So I'm going to say it. I googled what is the wealthiest ethnicity in the USA.
Well, that's a little bit confusing because Jews are sometimes classified as it's not clear whether it's an ethnic group or religious group. But here,
so I put because it's Indian. Apparently, it's Indian, and then second Taiwanese, Australian. But I would say
no, because they're including Jews as a religious group.
Okay.
Here, I'm going to Google you right now.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not going to send it to you. I'm going to send it to you here. I just Googled it. What's your URL? Let me just get the.
Yeah.
Exactly as here, and you'll see. Let's see how income varies among U.S. religious groups. Number 1, Jewish. Number 2, Hindu. Number 3, Episcopalian. $100,000 or more a year. Next come Hindu, or your reference to Indian, it's 36%. You know, Jews are just in a category all their own. Did you get my link?
Where did you send it?
To Antoine.
Yeah, Antoine on my email.
The one we were corresponding.
All right. I'll find it. You can continue. We can continue discussion, and I will try to. In the same time, I'm not like a great technician, so you know, but I will probably be successful to do something soon. Okay. Yeah, and we were talking about the figure who are daring to actually talk against the atrocity that Israel is perpetuating, but they seems to be put aside very quickly in the arena of politics. Usually, do you see anywhere in the world where actual truth can be said openly?
Listen, because you can't sustain a single newsworthy event where each day there's a new news cycle. You can't sustain it without a political movement which is attempting to sustain it. And the Palestinians don't have that. There's no organization, there's no leadership. That's how you turn an event into a cause. Why did Nelson Mandela become a cause? He became a cause, otherwise he would have just been locked up and forgotten. He became a cause, a global cause, because there was a movement that was committed to him, that built a solidarity network throughout the world. There were musicians who wrote songs about him in solidarity with that movement.
Yeah.
But nothing like that exists. So of course it's going to be forgotten in a week. Okay. There's a news cycle and it changes every day. Unless there's a political movement behind it. Ukraine is a movement because all the ruling elites support it. But you can't do that in the absence of a movement.
Okay, I found the, I could, now it's online. People can actually see the link you sent and how
and
you
can. It's no comparison. Between first and second, a full more than 10 points separates them.
I'm showing it now online. Yeah, Jewish. It's far ahead.
That's just been the case for decades, and you're not allowed to say it.
Well, I need at least not me.
Jews are very proud of it. It shows they're successful. In their mind, this is due to Jewish cleverness, Jewish hard work, or at core, because Jews are a chosen people. They're better. Okay? You may not agree with their explanation that they have achieved this stature because they are at core the chosen people. They're superior. They are better. You may not agree with that explanation. However, the facts are undeniable. Jews have experienced fantastic secular success in the Western world. They have. And they boast about it among themselves. They're proud of it among themselves. But the moment anyone else says it, it becomes anti-Semitic. Even in the UK in progressive sectors, there was in the British this report on anti-Semitism by this woman. It was called the Chirabati Commission. And she says, and she's supposedly progressive, but she says in her report, anyone who mentions that Jews are rich are guilty of anti-Semitism. It's like saying anybody who mentions the world is not flat is guilty of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
We're rich. They're powerful. They're
So,
organized. They're wealthy. Big shock. Big surprise.
yeah, in Ukraine they are talking about now there's two wars. There's the war in communication, who apparently Zelensky won by far, and there's the war
He
on the
didn't win,
ground.
he didn't win any war. All of this talk by these idiotic commentators, he's a brilliant
Communicator.
wartime leader.
Mm.
He's a brilliant communicator. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? He was created by the West. He could be mute. You understand? Can't speak a word, and they would still call him a great orator.
They will.
They would still call him a great orator. They're creative. He can't do anything wrong. He's a puppet of the West. He can't do anything wrong. Brilliant communicator. For Christ's sake, he's a stupid comedian who looks like he dresses like he's a bouncer at the New York Planet Fitness. Brilliant communicator. He has these Americans writing his speeches. They're third-rate replicas of Churchill. Churchill was, a brilliant stylist and speaker, as was Abe. Credit given where credit due. But Zelensky, there's nothing brilliant about him. Stupid comedian who suddenly is elevated to this ridiculous status by the repellent Western elites.
We'll come back to Ukraine just later, because I totally agree with you. To any serious person who look up at what is being said and what is unfolding there would actually come to the same conclusion. I agree. But sometimes when we read or talk to people, they seems to be very buying or eating the propaganda that we are putting in their plate.
Yeah, my mother. I once asked my mother. Both my parents passed through the Nazi Holocaust, and she was an extremely intelligent person. No question about that. She always used to say, "I'm not smart. I'm stupid," which she probably honestly felt, but she always felt she was smarter than anybody else. He might be stupid, but everybody else was stupider. I once asked her, "What do you think? Was Hitler a great orator? What's your opinion?" And her answer to me, I found quite interesting. She said to me, "You really couldn't tell, because Hitler, as you know, in his impulses, he wasn't a political person really in his impulses. He was an artist. All of his primary impulses were artistic, not really political. And so whenever he spoke, everything was carefully orchestrated. So he held his rallies at night. They would have the torches in these mass assemblies. He would fly in on a plane with the cockpit lit up as if it were God or a celestial being that was alighting on the planet Earth. And so it was a fantastical performance on stage. And it was impossible to separate Hitler, the performer, from Hitler, the orator. One of the things that Charlie Chaplin tried to do in The Great Dictator was to strip away all the orchestration and then to depict Hitler as some buffoon just foaming at the mouth and constantly spitting at the mouth. So what Chaplin tried to do was, this is the real Hitler. Take away the torches, take away the night rallies, take away the plane and the cockpit. He's a buffoon. And in the same way, Zelensky is completely orchestrated by the West. If you take away all the pyrotechnics created by the West around him, he's a 10th rate comedian. That's all he is. By the way, the same thing is true of Barack Obama. Obama was just a creation of liberal woke culture. He's actually an awful orator. If you ever see him trying to answer a question at a news conference.
No, obviously, when he had to answer, but at the time of his first campaign, I had to admit I was quite impressed by the words. And
just like you were impressed by, just like another generation was impressed by Hitler, because it's all an orchestration. And obviously, for it to work, it has to be done well. It's done well. What is Obama's great speaking abilities comprise? Number one, he tilts his head up as if he's posing for Mount Rushmore, where the presidents are located. So tilt the head up. Number two, he pans.
Yeah, pans a lot. Yeah,
always pans the audience. Number three, after every 30 seconds, there's this long pause in his speaking because his words are so profound. They have to, you need time for them to sink into you. You know, it's all just pure fakery. It's so transparently fake, nothing organic, nothing coming from inside him. It's all theater and performance. Now, it's true, as a very good actor once told me, Barry Shabaka, he said to me, great acting always comes from inside. And he said, I once said to him, the greatest actress in Hollywood was Bette Davis. Brilliant diction, brilliant body coordination. She was very good. And he said to me, no, Norm, I think you got it wrong. Great acting doesn't come from the external technique. It comes from something inside. And Obama doesn't have that because he's a complete fake. He is all external technique, the panning of the audience, holding the head up, the pregnant pauses. It's all fake. Zelensky doesn't even have that. Zelensky has nothing. He's just, the West imposes its will on you. He's brilliant, a brilliant wartime leader. I read this every.
He was elected actually to bring about the peace in the first place.
He's such a zero. He's a -1. He's such a zero. He's a -1. Yeah, he was elected, but he's a comedian. He doesn't know anything about politics, and he was very quickly #1, swamped by the reality of politics. Namely, he suddenly felt the pressure being exerted on him, first by domestic forces, and then those international forces.
Yep.
And #2, like virtually everybody, he gets carried away by the fame. He's now an international celebrity. Angelina Jolie comes to see him. Well, it's no joke. Hey, people get very carried away by that. Don't kid yourself. We're dealing with human beings.
Yeah, but maybe
Nancy Pelosi comes in this blue pantsuit with her pantsuit, you know. You get very excited by that. Most mortals get very excited about that.
I think he threatened. Personally, I think they told him, like, if you don't do what we want, you are dead man. And I think you have videos of that.
There is the raw physical threats of you'll find a bullet in your head. But I don't think, in my opinion, That's one factor, but I think the ego, pride, thrill, the thrill that he is on the headlines of every newspaper in the world, the thrill of it all. Personally, I believe that plays a larger role.
Yeah.
I think very early on the guy realized he's in over his head, and he really is literally just playing a role. He has no say in what's actually happening. But that's a separate issue from, these are all media creations. So to talk about brilliant wartime leader, brilliant orator, no, I know brilliant, I've seen brilliant oratory.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King, because he represented a movement. At the beginning, he didn't. He was just a petty bourgeois Black preacher, the elite of the Black community. But it's like what they say about Bernie. Bernie created the movement, but the movement also created Bernie. Bernie found inner resources, which probably he didn't even know existed. You know how often Bernie said, I never thought this would happen. He was going to go out, run a campaign. He never imagined that this huge army would be created.
No, and also the slogan was not me, us, US. Like,
very good.
I was really, I like that understanding of things.
Yeah,
humility
totally
for
agree.
once in politics.
I totally agree. Not me, us. Totally agree. So he grew as a person because of the movement. And the same thing with Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
This isn't Barack Obama.
Well, Bernie is still voting 40 billion for Ukraine.
Listen, I'm not happy about that. I actually think it's a disgrace, a moral disgrace. His family, his extended family, was wiped out in Poland, I think it was. I think he's Polish. I'm not sure, Polish or Ukraine, but I think Poland. And that to be voting this money for weapons, that the most high-tech, cutting-edge technology, a large part of which will fall into the hands of neo-Nazis and far-rightists with no control whatsoever, just dumping tens and tens and tens and tens more $billion in weapons on this country with no control whatsoever. So arming neo-Nazis, arming far-rightists, for a Jew whose family went through what his family went through to the point of being exterminated, it sickens me. It sickens me. Does that mean I lost all respect for him? Not really. I think what he's doing is terrible, but I want to look at the bigger picture. That's the way it goes.
Talking about emboldened, like you were talking about Zelensky now, what do you make of the Israeli military on killing Christian journalists and then attacking the funeral? I mean, there's no limits to anything anymore. I mean, what they did before, I'm not saying was less, but I know in the West, we don't really care because they're brown and they are Muslim. But now they are doing it like openly to Christian, and I don't know if this Christian is relevant, but I mean, I'm like, where are they going to stop then? But I mean, they doesn't support anything of that sort.
They're not going to stop because they're a crazy state. It's a lunatic state. It's the only state, actually, I think, in the world where there's no left in Israel. There's no center in Israel. See, most countries in the world where a far right, what they call the alt-right, has come to power, Bolsonaro in Brazil. Well, for a Bolsonaro, and the political forces he represents. There is a Lula and the political forces he represents. In the US, there was a Trump and the political forces he represented, and there was a Bernie Sanders and the political forces he represented. And you can see it across the world. Israel is different. There's no left in Israel. There's not even a center in Israel. There is a right, a far right, and an ultra right. That's Israel. And the country is completely lunatic. It knows it can do whatever it wants with complete and total impunity. Am I shocked by the killing of the journalist? Well, two things. I don't watch television or media in general, so I did not know who she is. I can't claim to have known her as a personality, whereas every Palestinian apparently knew her as a personality. She looks exactly like my webmaster, who's Palestinian, Sana Qasim. So for me, it's a weird thing to be looking at the image of the murdered journalist, because it's a spitting image of my webmaster. So I didn't feel the kind of personal identification that apparently virtually every, if not every Palestinian felt. Hers was the largest funeral in history, in Palestinian history, since the funeral for Faisal al-Husseini, I think in 2001, who was a senior member of the Palestinian leadership. And she was a journalist, so she didn't have the whole institutional force behind her. It was a single individual who brought out the largest mass support, genuine grief at her death. Did it surprise me? Of course not. If you look at the Great March of Return, which is an overwhelmingly nonviolent protest by Palestinians in Gaza, trying to end
that was a massacre.
The siege. There was a Human Rights Council produced, the UN Human Rights Council produced a report that said Israel intentionally targets children, medics, journalists, and disabled people. Wheelchairs or on crutches. You know. That's Israel. That's its modus operandi. It's a lunatic state. So it didn't surprise me, and there wasn't for me the personal component, because I never actually saw her in Al Jazeera. But people told me, and I trust their judgment, she was an exceptionally decent, courageous, and intelligent person. And so one can't help but be moved and disgusted. And as I say in my case, because she looks exactly like my webmasters, that's so strange. That kind of brought home to me the horror of it all.
Someone is asking if there is a labor Zionist party in Israel representing what we can consider left.
Not left.
No.
They're far right. There is a Jewish labor component in the Labor Party. They're the worst. The worst.
In terms of leftist policies.
Oh, in terms of using the anti-Semitism smear in order to repress criticism of Israel.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did when the amnesty reports went out. They immediately condemned the report as being anti-Semitic. But at one point, when you use it all the time, you know, the story about the wolf that I tell my sons, is it still working? Does anybody believe in the general public, do you think?
Does anybody believe what?
That amnesty is anti-Semitic, for instance?
Uh, I don't, as I said, amnesty, it relies on liberal donations. It's it doesn't get large-scale donations. Human Rights Watch did. It got, I guess it was, I can't remember now. You could check. It may have been $100 million from George Soros. Just look, George Soros Human Rights Watch donation.
Okay.
It may have been $100 million.
I'm checking. Yeah. And so, what's your point?
The point is, George Soros is Jewish. He's liberal. They're not going to take a chance of losing his money. So they knew they can keep George Soros on board, supporting Human Rights Watch significantly with huge amounts of money, and still say Israel is in part an apartheid state.
Yeah, I have it in front of my eyes, and I will share it now. Here we go.
So they're too smart.
100 millions is the biggest gift Human Rights Watch has received. In 2010, the Open Society Foundation donated about 800 million. Yeah.
And he's a prominent Jew. So they wouldn't take the chance of alienating this constituency. They figured that they can carry them. So I don't think the anti-Semitic label sticks among their constituency. The anti-Semitic
trope or
slander
yeah
sticks with them.
Okay. So what now? I mean, you depict a very not sad, but a very hopeless situation for Palestine. Do you think the I'd say the war that is occurring in this moment has, in some degree, the potential to change the balance of the power in the world, and maybe bring about some beginning of some sort of courage from other nations to support?
No, not bring about courage. This is a war orchestrated by elites. This is not there's no popular movement in either direction here. Of course, there's cheerleading by people who have been completely brainwashed, but there's no popular movement. This is a war of elites, and frankly, in my opinion, has very little even to do with Russia. It has, at the end of the day, it's all about China. They're trying to diminish the power of Russia in order to focus all their energy on that one rising economic and presumably also political
military
power, namely China. And so I don't think, first of all, everything you see now with the Ukraine is just a prelude to the US using Taiwan as a pretext to try to strangle China. They'll do the same thing as they did with Ukraine. So there's very little possibility China is would, not that it's a real possibility, but would let Russia lose. Because China knows they're next. So they're not going to let the West defeat Russia. And unfortunately, the strange thing happened that the far right in the United States has now seized on the Ukraine to denounce those supporting it as wasting precious US resources, which are needed at home for this war in the Ukraine, whereas the so-called left what's called in the US the Squad and Bernie have joined in with the Biden administration, and now they've become the pro-war party. And the far right has become the anti-war party. It's a very lamentable state of affairs. So the idea that something progressive can be drawn from this situation, though, it's a total disaster.
The future is kind of bleak. So I wanted to finish on a topic that you're working on as well. I think you're releasing a new book on academic freedom, if I'm not mistaken.
It's on identity politics, cancel culture, and academic.
Very interesting topic. And like many of the guests I have here, it cannot be said that these people are welcome in the traditional media platform, namely the press or the big television channels we have. And I think that's the same for you. Would you agree that are you like an internet, because you've been named like in the field of political science as the fifth most influencing person, and
I was named in one algorithm.
Okay.
No, I have to be
modest.
Honest. No, not modest. I don't think being a braggart is not a good thing. Being modest is also not a good thing. I think the good thing is to be realistic about your.
It's what you are, yeah. That's
your
I would
capacity.
define you as realistic, yes.
So realistically speaking, I've had some influence, mostly because through the Palestine Support Network, I was doing a lot of speaking at a period in my life. I was traveling around the world literally 3 times a week.
Yeah, hardworking, I would say. Very hardworking, yeah.
And I also worked hard.
Inconsistent.
And I was consistent, all those things. Conscientious, consistent. And also there was a popular network which sponsored me. After the emergence of BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, and my criticism of it, the popular network then declared me persona non grata, and I stopped speaking. And so my reach was just drastically reduced. And plus, I have very little attraction to the woke politics. So then another sector of the left canceled me, the woke left canceled. So now I would say I'm pretty isolated. The book is basically, I did not have an interesting life apart from my politics. It was frankly a very dull life. I'm not happy about that, but it's just factually the case. And I wish as a person I was more well-rounded. I was much more well-rounded as a young man than I became.
But what would be an exciting and successful life then? Do you have an idea?
As I said to you during the conversation before we got on air, if you read the private letters of Rosa Luxemburg, it was an extremely rich life. She had she was like a force of nature, and she would focus on one period of her life is botany, art. She was an artist, economics, politics, literature. It was so broad and so deep and so rich and so exhilarating. You read her letters and a thrill passes through you.
That's true.
And she was very unconventional. Her closest friend was, I don't know if these names mean anything to you. Your generation doesn't know anything.
We're trying our best. We're trying our best to catch up the shit.
Yeah, but you're not going to catch up by tweeting or reading tweets. Her closest comrade was Clara Zetkin. And Clara Zetkin was, like Rosa, a leader of the German Social Democratic Party. And Clara Zetkin, her son, was named Kostya Zetkin. And Rosa Luxemburg's lover for a large period of her life was Kostya Zetkin. In other words, her best friend's son. You can just imagine what the conversation was like between them. You know, Clara saying to Rosa, "So Rosa, how is my son in bed?" Which, you know, for me, it's like, if I could find a word, it was a zest for life. It was a zest. She found every aspect of life kind of thrilling and exhilarating. That's why her death is so painful. She died during the German Revolution, right during and after World War I. And
was she assassinated or?
Yeah, the right wing, the Nazis.
Yeah.
Effectively, the Nazis. I mean, precursors of the Nazis. Yeah. Precursors of the Nazis. They clubbed her to death, threw her body in the ocean, and it was washed up 3 months later. They found her body. And when you think about so much life was within her. Her death is very painful. When I was in graduate school, I started to read all the biographies of Rosa Luxemburg. There was the famous one by Peter Nettle. There was one in French by a guy, his last name began with B, I can't remember. And then there was the one I still have on my bookshelf. And once somebody said to me, "Norman, why do you look so depressed? Why do you look so down?" I said, "Why do I look so depressed? How would you feel if Rosa Luxemburg died 3 times in 3 weeks?" I read the 3 biographies, and each one she had a terrible death. So when you ask me what's a rich life for a political person, I would say someone like hers. It was.
Why don't you make your life like hers?
I didn't. I mean, it's over.
So what? So it's not over. You're talking in front of me, laughing, making jokes before we were on air even more than now. So why not?
I told you I strongly believe in being realistic, not in being in denial, and that was the arc of my life. A large part of it was chosen, and another part of it was chosen for me by fate, because I knew I was good at certain things, like we talked about earlier when you described, who was it that we were describing as conscientious and competent? I can't recall what we were talking about.
The journalists that were killed.
Oh, yes, exactly. And I knew I was conscientious. I knew I was competent. I had. That
was Shirin Abu Akleh, I think.
Yeah. And I had this feeling inside me, if I didn't do certain things in terms of focusing hard on all these Israeli reports and the human rights reports, and just almost monomaniacally, like Captain Ahab and Moby Dick, just focusing on it, I knew nobody else would do it.
So do you think you sacrificed yourself kind of a way?
I say part of it was chosen, part of it was not. I always it resonated to me. The greatest African American of the 20th century was a fellow named Paul Robeson. Robeson was a brilliant actor, linguist, athlete. He was one of those Renaissance persons. He
Not like
excelled.
Zelensky acting, you mean?
Right. No, he was a Shakespearean actor and a film actor for Shakespeare. Robeson was black, African American, and he at one point he got bound up in politics of the leftist sort. He was very sympathetic to the communists and in particular to the Soviet Union. He was a close confidant of Stalin. His son was educated in the Soviet Union, went to school with Stalin's daughter, Svetlana. And Robeson, during the Spanish Civil War, he went to speak, he went to sing for the loyalist troops in Spain, okay? And he said something that became the epitaph for his gravestone. It eventually was carved into his gravestone. And the words read, "An artist must elect to fight for freedom or for slavery. I have made my choice. No, I have made my decision, semicolon. I had no choice." I always like those words. I have made my decision, semicolon, dot, semicolon. I had no choice. Now, those two parts of the sentence are in tension with each other. If you made a decision, then you had a choice. And if you had no choice, then you didn't make a decision. And that's how I always conceived my own life. I made a decision. This is what I'm going to do with my life. However, given what happened to my parents, I never felt I had a choice if I was going to remain faithful to their martyrdom. And to get back to the original point, I always felt I was doing something that nobody else not could do. Other people could do what I do because it didn't take any great mental gifts. Professor Chomsky, what he does, other people can't do. What I do, other people can do, but they wouldn't do. I was willing to do that kind of painful, tedious, micro work. And so I always felt guilty when I wasn't focusing on that. If I would pick up a novel, I'd say, no, Norm, you got to work on that. You got to work on that. Got to work on that because people are depending on you. Nobody else is going to do it. People are depending on you to do this. You're the only one who would do. So it ended up, I never felt the freedom to do what Rosa does. You know, she was collecting plants, pasting them in her book for her botany album. Then she was studying geology, then this and that. First of all, I didn't have her talent and ability. Let's be clear. She was extremely remarkable human, gifted mentally. She was the greatest figure in the socialist movement, with the exception of Marx. And I'm not even sure if Marx was, Marx is, of course, much more deeply grounded in philosophy than her. But she knew the economics. That's where she got her degree in economics. But she was certainly, after Marx, the greatest figure in revolutionary socialism, and a very interesting figure from the point of view of these idiotic identity politics. She was Polish. She was Jewish. She was middle class. She was a woman. And she was also a cripple. She had a hip impairment. Okay? Polish, Jewish, middle class, woman, cripple. And
sounds good for the woke people, eh? This is
no, just the opposite. Just
No?
the opposite. The opposite. She became the leader of the far left workers' movement. Now, you see, according to the wokeness, any of those things would have disqualified her. What's a Pole leading a German movement?
No, that's exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
I agree. What is a middle-class woman leading a German movement? And all of her, as it were, identities in our current politics would have disqualified her. And yet, she was, by all accounts, loved and revered by the German, overwhelmingly male working class. Very inspiring. I'm going to have to get off because we're hitting 12 o'clock my time. I have to teach today.
Yes,
but,
that's awesome.
It was very nice talking to you. And I wish you the very, very best, of course. And
thank you very much, Norman. That was also awesome to have you back. I hope I will have you again. Maybe in the next time I will read you your book and we can discuss it maybe. Last time you were here was 2 years precisely. So yeah, it's even a bit large as a rhythm, but I'll read your book and we'll keep in touch.
I'm at the point in life where I'm very happy if I remember where I was yesterday.
So all the best for you. Thank you very much for your time again, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.